Potiphar was a Pharaoh officer at the time when Jose, Jacob's son, was taken to Egypt. The name Potiphar probably means to whom it gave, in the sense of putting it on earth. For those who do not know, Ra was the sun god worshipped in ancient Egypt, and this meaning comes from the understanding adopted by many scholars that the name Potiphar is an abbreviated form of the power name. If this is correct, then Pharaoh's officer and the priest of the city of On, who later became Joseph's father-in-law in Egypt, had the same name. However, this does not mean that Potiphar and Asenath's father, Joseph's wife, were the same person. In this video, we will know everything the Bible really says about who was Potiphar. Potiphar was an Egyptian who, according to the Bible, served as Pharaoh's officer and guard captain. An interesting point in the biblical description of Potiphar is that the Hebrew word applied to it is the same for eunuch, including some translations of the Bible in Portuguese they refer to Potiphar. However, the scholars explain that the most general and old meaning of this word indicated a courtesan, that is, a court officer. Thus, eunuchos sense is a more restricted meaning of the same word, used to designate a court officer who served in women's accommodation. But in the case of Potiphar, a married man, according to the biblical text. Obviously, the most appropriate meaning of this word is even the one who refers to an officer who held a privileged position, holding a position of confidence in Pharaoh's court. According to the historians of Egyptian history, the type of position held by Potiphar as the captain of the guard made him the leader of the body of the royal guardia of the royal guard. It is also true that some commentators suggest that perhaps Potiphar was a type of butler in the Egyptian palace. But that seems to be quite unlikely. We know that Potiphar appears in the biblical history in connection with the arrival of Joseph to Egypt. The Bible says that Joseph's brothers practiced a great evil against him and ended up selling an Ishmaelite merchant caravan who was heading towards Egypt. In this way, Joseph ended up in Egyptian lands to be sold as a slave. In Egypt, Potiphar became interested and bought Jose to serve at his home. The biblical text does not inform you what price Potiphar paid for Joseph, but as the Ishmaelites had bought Joseph from their brothers for 20 silver cycles, most likely the amount paid for Potiphar was superior to this, so that the Ishmaelites could make some profit. And despite all the circumstances, in the house of Potiphar, the slave Joseph prospered. The Bible makes it clear that this unlikely condition was due to the fact that the Lord was with him. Even Potiphar realized that Joseph was a man blessed by God. The biblical text still informs, according to the May we read in Genesis, chapter 39, verse 5. In fact, with Joseph in his home, Potiphar had to worry only about his more personal matters. This is exactly what we read in chapter 39 of the book of Genesis. And the Lord's blessing was about everything he had in the house and the countryside. And he left everything he had in Joseph's hand, so he knew nothing about what he was with him, except for the bread he ate. And Joseph was beautiful and of appearance. But if, on the one hand, Potiphar seemed to have great esteem for Joseph, on the other, the wife of that Egyptian officer put his eyes on Jose in a lascivious way. As we have just read in Genesis chapter 39, verse 6, the Bible says, Joseph was a beautiful man of size and countenance. Then Potiphar's wife began to press Joseph to lie with her. Even at that time, the adduced was already recognized by many people of the ancient East, near as a very serious transgression, to the point that the old legal codes established the death penalty as the adequate punishment for the adultersman. Joseph, however, was a very righteous man and fear of God. For Joseph, Potiphar had entrusted him with the administration of his home, and he could never betray his confidence with any relationship with that woman. More than that, Joseph also knew that if he gave in to the attack of Potiphar's wife, he would sin against God. In Genesis chapter 39, verse 9, we read exactly about Joseph's conduct in this regard. But in the face of Joseph's firmness, Potiphar's wife did not give up, until one day she grabbed Joseph for her clothes and tried to force him to have relationships with her. Joseph then fled that woman, leaving her clothes in her hands. And that's when Potiphar's wife called the men of her house and falsely accused Joseph of trying to violate her. So later, when Potiphar returned to your home, that lying woman supported her version of the facts, and Joseph was eventually arrested. A slave who tried to violate his lord's wife would probably be killed. But as Joseph was just sent to prison, many scholars believe that perhaps Potiphar has somehow suspicious of his wife's testimony. In any case, the truth is that Joseph was sent to the jail that received the prisoners of the Pharaoh court. But of course, in all this, God's purpose was being fulfilled, and all that evil would be made good. And after these things, nothing more is said in the Bible about Potiphar's story. Some commentators conjecture that perhaps the chief of jailers who trusted Jose in prison was Potiphar himself. Others, in turn, suggest that Potiphar was not necessarily the more jailer, but the head of the guard who later handed over Pharaoh's baker and coped to Joseph's care in jail. How the biblical text says that the jail was in the house of captain of the guard, and if the assumption that Potiphar was the captain of the guard responsible for jail, then Joseph was imprisoned on the premises of Potiphar's house. But anyway, the biblical text is not clear in this sense, and nothing about it can be stated for sure. And if you watched this far and enjoyed learning about who was Potiphar in the Bible, leave your comment and share this video with someone.